and governance. At this point, if you have already remembered this company called Data Solars, the CTO comes and says security is #1 priority from now on. She hires a DevSecOps engineer called Brian, and he starts looking around to see what needs to be done from the data point of view. The first thing, when you store data, you probably need to encrypt it. AWS provides ways to encrypt, but it's our job to make sure that we encrypt. Nothing magically happens. We should make sure that we encrypt. If we transfer important data, we should always be able to make sure that we encrypt data in transit. And if you are dealing with sensitive data, it's very important to make sure we decrypt and encrypt before the data is being processed. If you store data on S3, AWS provides a service called Macy. It's managed this service that you can point it to your S3 buckets or buckets. You can define what bucket to look into, and then it will look into it, and it will, based on some pre-trained like formats, it guesses if it has PII or sensitive data. It's not 100% accurate, but it's good enough. And it depends, like charge-wise, like cost-wise, also it's important to make sure that if you're dealing with large volume of data, make sure to do the calculation. Otherwise, it might be very expensive. You also have this option of using Amazon CloudWatch like data protection or AWS Glue Data Glue to either detect or mask. And on the application layer, also you can use Amazon Comprehend to see if the user has sent data that might contain PII, and you don't want that your PII to end up in somewhere that you're probably sharing with, to detect and do something about it, either mask it or do something. And also you can use Amazon Redshift dynamic data masking. But how about data platform that we have? Before answering that, let's see why handling, like managing permissions on data platforms is hard. We talked about data lakes, but in a simplified version, data lake is basically nothing but just a storage, like a detached storage and data catalog and some sort of analytical engine that does the analytics, like query based on what metadata we have in the data catalog from the data that we have already stored on S3 on a simple way. And then you might usually handle permission in different ways for all these things. Like for instance, on S3 you might use resource policies. For the data catalog, you will use IAM policies for the user to see who accesses to what. And for the analytical engine, you configure the engine to work with the data catalog. And at the same time, you configure IAM policies for the user to access the engine. And even thinking about all these different ways and synchronizing all these things, we know that it's not easy, and also it's prone to error. So what can we do? Fortunately, AWS provide us with a service called lake formation, and with that we have two ways of defining these access controls. And they are usually being used at the same time. We have the resource policies for the more like generic ways to say who accesses to what like buckets, and then we use type-based access control to have like more granular access and define like who gets access to what row and what row and what column. As an example of, and how does it work? Basically, the administrator registers the location, sets up permission on resource. When you query these services, first administrator check the authorization with lake formation, and then with the credential coming back and with the scope defined there, it defines what kind of data you have access to the resource on a S3 bucket. And then based on that, these tools again use that to filter out what you're not allowed to access to. At this point, you might say, okay, but a few scenarios. You might have like new employees coming to your company, haven't had their clearance yet. It's banking, it's a very important thing, and they should not have access to sensitive data or even PII before they get their clearance. Easy. For instance, Tina, new employee, she joins the company, the administrator uses the include exclude list to just mask everything except the number fixed in this scenario, which is something that is not PII, it's not important. And at the same time, we might have Mariam from the BI team who should have access to everything except the sensitive data. Similarly, with the same technique, we can just mask the credit card information for her. And another scenario, we might have Alex from the Danish sales team who should have access only for the customers in Denmark, but no sensitive data. This time, we can use row column filtering, and for that we can just and it's easy. We can use like a particular QL format, which is like if you have worked, for instance, with DynamoDB, is the easier format of dealing with DynamoDB compared to the API one. It's the same format. With that, we can define like to what row and to what column who should get access to. And then at this time, Brian says, "Oh, I just realized you're processing credit cards. Don't do it. Just a side note, don't do it if you can avoid it. Don't do it. We don't want to deal with credit card if you're like not a credit processor company." But in this scenario, they're doing it. He says, "Yeah, I realize we should be PCI DSS compliant, right?" And the CTO says, "Okay, I'm going to see what's the business point of view. Can you see from the technical point of view what can we use, to even figure out how far we are from PCI DSS compliant?" And fortunately, AWS, we can use AWS config with conformance packs. They have some, in there you have some pre-managed ones. You can have your own conformance packs, but also you have managed already built there, conformance packs either for PCI DSS, HIPAA, best practices, like there are many of them. And then if you apply them, the good news is that you can even have access to the history. See like, oh, 6 months ago we were not, you're like 90% compliant. We didn't have this kind of compliancy, but now, good news, we have it. Or even you can go one level further and you can automate remediation actions. Like if something happens, we want to be compliant, right? And then you can automate. If someone like this guy, like Guyan, creates a new volume and doesn't apply encryption on it, just destroy it or stop it or whatever. You can apply it, but you have the option.